December 14th, 1944. Snow fell in slow, quiet flakes over the forested hills east of Monschau, settling softly on the frozen pines like dust on old relics. The war had twisted this corner of the Ardennes into a landscape of fear, rumours and half-truths. But for 16-year-old Lucas Ritter, the world had shrunk even smaller than that, down to the shaking breath inside his chest and the battered leather map case clutched under his arm. He hadn't meant to find the map. He hadn't meant to be anywhere near the front lines. 2 days earlier, he had been nothing more than a farm boy pressed into the Volkssturm, given an oversized coat, a rusted rifle, and a lecture about duty. But the older men in his unit had scattered when American shelling tore through their position near Herfen, leaving Lucas alone in the drifting smoke, ears ringing, boots buried in mud. That was when he had stumbled into the collapsed command dugout, still smouldering. Timbers snapped, earth caved inward. He had seen the shape of a man inside, a dead German officer, face grey and eyes open. Lucas had frozen, unsure whether to run or vomit. But then he noticed the officer's map case lying in the rubble, half burned, but somehow intact. Against every rule, against every fear gripping his gut, Lucas reached out and pulled it free. Inside was a map, unlike anything he had seen, thick, glossy, covered in sharply drawn lines, positions, supply routes, Allied advance paths, even penciled German counterattack arrows in red and blue. It looked important. Too important. He should have left it where it lay, should have gone back to his unit, should have done a dozen things differently. But the forest was burning, artillery thundered, and a strange instinct, part fear, part something else, told him to run north toward the hills where his family once walked goats in summers that now felt like another lifetime. For a full day he wandered, cold and starving, moving between pine trunks and snowdrifts, clutching the map case like a talisman. He expected to meet German patrols, maybe even partisan groups, but instead, the forest stayed eerily quiet until the distant metallic rumble rose through the trees, a sound he had never heard before, but every soldier whispered about. Tanks, American ones. The ground trembled softly under his boots. Lucas ducked behind a fallen log, pressing his cheek to the frozen bark. The sound grew louder, clanking metal, grinding gears, and the heavy snort of diesel engines. A column, moving cautiously, engines echoing between the trees. Panic flooded him like ice water. He was alone. A boy with nothing but a dead man's map and a rifle he barely knew how to fire. But it wasn't the rifle that mattered. Not anymore. Not when he remembered the markings he had seen on the map. The ridge lines. The hidden roads Germans had carved decades earlier for timber hauling. Roads the Americans didn't know existed. Slowly, forcing himself to breathe, Lucas pulled out the map again. The paper crackled stiffly in the cold. He traced the lines with numb fingers. The US tanks were coming up the main forest road, the obvious route, but just 300 meters ahead, that road forked near a narrow gorge. One route led safely to the village of Rohren. The other route, the one that looked passable but wasn't, led onto a slope thick with marsh and hidden sinkholes made worse by melting snow. If the tank crews took the wrong path, they wouldn't just get stuck, they'd be trapped, blind, exposed. Lucas swallowed hard. He could hear the first tank now, its turret brushing branches aside as it pushed through the trees. He had seconds to choose, run and hide, as any terrified boy would, or do something else entirely. The cold cut through his coat. His breath turned to mist that drifted away like smoke. He could hear the voices now, American voices, low and cautious, not the monstrous shouts propaganda posters had taught him to expect. They were talking about road forks, about pushing through before nightfall, about not getting bogged down again like last week's disaster outside Wallerscheid. They didn't know. He did. Lucas pushed himself up onto shaking legs. His knees wanted to buckle, his body screamed to run, but something inside him, some stubborn streak carved from years of watching his father survive crises with nothing but wits and stubbornness, held him steady. He stepped into the forest path as the first Sherman tank emerged from the trees. its gun barrel sliding toward him like a pointing finger. Snowflakes drifted over its armor, melting on the hot engine deck. A machine gunner perched on top turned sharply, startled by the sight of a boy stepping into their path with his hands raised. For a second, just a second, everything froze. The tank growled. Lucas's heart hammered. The world narrowed to a single impossible moment in which 16 years of fear collided with a choice he couldn't take back. Then a voice erupted from the tank crew, sharp and confused. "Kid, stop! Hey, what the hell?" Lucas wet his lips, stepped closer, and yelled in broken English, taught to him by a former schoolteacher years before the war ever reached them. "Wrong road," he shouted. "You go wrong way. Very bad ground. Very bad." The tank engine idled. The commander half rose from the turret, craning to see the path ahead. Behind him, more armoured silhouettes appeared in the trees, another Sherman, then an M3 half-track, then another tank. A whole armoured column. The commander frowned down at Lucas, snow collecting on his helmet brim. "What do you mean, wrong road?" Lucas didn't answer at first. Instead, he held up the map case like an offering. The boy's breath trembled. His fingers were white with cold. But he held the map steady, because now the only thing more dangerous than lying was telling the truth. The commander hesitated, then signalled a halt. Engines rumbled down to a heavy idle. Soldiers leaned out of hatches, staring at the scrawny German teen blocking their way. Lucas took a breath so deep it burned. "The map," he whispered. It shows something you do not see." And with that sentence, spoken by a boy who should have been nowhere near a battlefield, the entire fate of the tank column shifted. December 14th, 1944, did not feel like a day for miracles. The Ardennes forest was tightening into a vice of cold and silence, and the men of the 89th US Tank Battalion were already exhausted from days of navigating twisting fire trails and forest tracks that weren't on any American-issued maps. They had lost 2 tanks to mud just the week before, and 1 Sherman had nearly slid sideways down an icy ravine before dawn. The battalion commander, Captain Nathan Cole, was in no mood for superstitions, yet the image of a trembling German teenager holding out a scorched map case froze him more than any enemy ambush would have. Lucas Ritter stood beneath the Sherman's towering barrel, snowflakes melting on his eyelashes, breath shaking in front of him. He did not know the names of the men staring at him from the tank hatches, but he could read the tension in their eyes, the stiff posture, the fingers hovering near triggers, the suspicion that he might be bait for something worse. But he also saw something else mixed in those expressions: fatigue. A bone-deep tiredness that made the soldiers squint at him, not as a combatant, but as someone who looked equally lost. Captain Cole stepped down from the tank, boots crunching in the snow. He approached slowly, one hand on his sidearm, but not drawing it. Lucas held his breath until it hurt. He felt like a rabbit waiting to be shot for stumbling too close. "Let me see the case," Cole said. Lucas swallowed, then extended the leather case with both hands. The captain snatched it, flipped the flap open, and unfolded the map inside. The other soldiers leaned in. For a long moment, only the engines rumbled around them. Cole's jaw tightened as he scanned the markings. He recognized the symbol codes, the ridge notations, and the German shorthand for forest elevation, a strange, uneasy reminder that the Wehrmacht had surveyed this land decades earlier for logging routes, bridges, and marsh drainage trenches. The Americans had none of this on their standard maps. "You can read this?" Cole asked without looking up. Yes," Lucas said. "Some parts. Enough." The captain looked up sharply. "Who gave it to you?" Lucas hesitated. He felt the officer's eyes drilling into his skull, searching for lies he didn't have the skill to hide. He lowered his gaze. "I found it," he whispered. "In a broken bunker. The officer was dead." For a moment, Lucas braced himself for a blow, a shout, a hand grabbing his coat collar, but none came. Instead, Cole exhaled slowly, a long, frost-filled sigh. He looked over the boy again, from the tattered coat to the two large boots, and something shifted in his expression. He wasn't looking at a German soldier anymore. He was looking at a scared 16-year-old stuck in the middle of a battlefield. Behind them, one of the crewmen called out, "Captain, we ain't got all day. Snow's getting heavier. If this fork ahead is bad ground, we need to know before we put 30 tons of steel on it." Cole folded the map. "All right, kid. Show me." The words hit Lucas like a punch of cold air. Show him? Lead them? His knees almost buckled at the thought. But he nodded and began walking, legs stiff, snow crunching beneath each step. The vast Sherman tank rolled behind him, its engine growling like a beast on a metal leash. The rest of the column crept forward in a staggered line, turrets tracking the tree line, machine gunners scanning for threats. Lucas felt their eyes on him, dozens of wary, suspicious, armed men trusting a lone enemy teenager with the movement of an entire armoured column. Every step he took felt like a crime against his own homeland, yet also like the only right thing left to do. They reached the road fork within minutes. To an untrained eye, both paths looked equally safe. Snow-covered dirt roads flanked by towering firs. But Lucas walked to the right-hand fork, knelt, and brushed the snow aside with a numb hand. Beneath the shallow layer, the ground was softer than it should have been. Mud seeped through the cracks in the frozen crust. The road looked solid. It was not. Cole crouched beside him. "How deep is it?" 3 meters in some places, Lucas said. "Sometimes more. Snow hides the holes. Tanks sink, roll over, break. The map says this way is death." A silence fell. The men behind them murmured, shifting uneasily. One of them spat into the snow. "How the hell were we supposed to know that?" a gunner muttered. Cole pointed at the forest. "We weren't, but he did." They followed the left-hand road instead, keeping the boy near the lead tank so he could alert them to more dangers. The column moved slower than before, engines growling at low throttle to avoid drawing unnecessary attention. The snow thickened, turning the world into a muted grey haze. Branches sagged under its weight, occasionally dropping chunks that thumped onto tank hulls. Lucas walked with his head ducked against the wind. Every now and then, he glanced at the map, checking the line markings, aligning themselves with elevation points. He felt foolish, just a boy pretending to be a scout. But his instincts guided him more than the map did. He had walked these woods every autumn of his childhood, gathering firewood with his father, hunting mushrooms with his little sister. The forest was in his bones, in the way he recognized the curve of a slope or the sound of water under snow. An hour passed, then another. The deeper they moved, the more nervous the Americans became. The Ardennes was a nest of German patrols, and a tank column this far east risked running headfirst into infantry or packed guns lying in wait. The men scanned the tree line constantly. Even Lucas felt the prickle at the back of his neck, as though a dozen unseen eyes watched them. Then it happened. Quiet, almost invisible at first. A branch snapped somewhere to their right. The column halted instantly. Soldiers raised rifles. Machine guns rotated toward the sound. Lucas froze so hard his breath stilled in his throat. Another snap. Then voices, harsh, clipped German commands. A patrol. Lucas's stomach dropped. If the patrol spotted him walking with Americans, if they recognized him, if they took him alive. He shut his eyes, expecting a shot. Instead, Captain Cole grabbed his coat and yanked him behind the tank tread, crouching low. "Stay down," Cole whispered. "Don't move." Lucas pressed his back to the freezing metal hull, heart pounding so loud he feared the patrol would hear it. The voices were close now, shadows weaving between the trees. Lucas could see shapes through the branches, Germans in snow camouflage smocks, rifles slung, moving in a loose formation. 6 of them. Not many, but enough to kill the boy and alert a larger unit about the American column. Cole made a quick hand signal to the nearest tank gunner, silent, precise. The Americans held their fire, their breaths turning into thin clouds that drifted upward. The Germans were 20 meters away. 10, 5. One of them paused, frowning toward the road as if sensing something. Lucas bit his lip until he tasted blood. Then the wind shifted, shaking snow loose from overhead branches. The sudden rustling distracted the patrol just long enough. The leader murmured an order, and the group veered left, deeper into the forest, unaware they had come within seconds of discovering a column of American armor and a trembling boy hiding behind them. The soldiers didn't breathe until the voices faded entirely. Cole turned to Lucas. "You okay?" Lucas nodded, though his whole body trembled. "You just saved us again," Cole muttered. Lucas didn't feel like a savior. He felt like a frightened boy, clinging to a map he barely understood. But the captain's voice held something new, a quiet trust that weighed heavier than fear. For the first time, Lucas realized he wasn't guiding tanks. He was guiding men, lives. The responsibility tightened around his chest like a rope. But he kept walking, kept leading, kept glancing back at the American faces watching him, some wary, some curious, some strangely gentle. By late afternoon, the snowstorm thickened into a blinding curtain of white. Visibility shrank to meters. Lucas could barely see the next tree ahead, but his instincts remained sharp, tugging him away from hollows and slopes toward firmer ground. The men trusted him now. They didn't say it aloud, but their footsteps stayed close behind his, their movements sinking to his pace. And when night finally fell and the tanks rumbled to a safe clearing sheltered by rock walls, Lucas felt a wave of exhaustion crash through him. He had lived through the day, but the hardest part hadn't come yet. Not the moral dilemma, not the truth he still hid, not the confrontation waiting in Section 3, the part where everything changed. December 14th drifted into night like a slow, dark tide creeping through the forest. By the time the US tank column settled into the rocky clearing, the wind had sharpened into icy needles that tore through coats and rattled loose branches overhead. The engines of the Shermans rumbled low, warming their metal hearts against the cold, while the men began the careful, silent ritual of securing a temporary camp. No fires, no lights. Only muffled lanterns, tucked behind tarps to keep the glow from leaking into the trees. Lucas Ritter stood near the lead tank, arms wrapped around himself, shaking uncontrollably. The day's adrenaline was gone. All that remained was the cold, and the consequences of the choice he had made. He had guided the Americans, his enemy, through a forest that was supposed to belong to the people he grew up among. He had saved them from mud, from sinkholes, from a German patrol. He had done it knowing what the soldiers in that patrol would have done to him if they discovered he was helping the Americans. He had done it knowing what his own countrymen would call him. Traitor. He repeated the word silently as he stared at his boots, snow melting around the tips. Traitor. But another word whispered back. Alive. A soldier handed him a wool blanket. Lucas flinched, not expecting the gesture. The American, a young man barely older than him, nodded encouragingly and handed him a tin cup filled with something warm. Lucas sniffed it cautiously. Broth, thin, salty, steaming. "Drink," the soldier said softly. "It's cold enough to kill you." Lucas drank. The warmth flooded his chest like a slow-burning fire, melting the ice clinging to his ribs. He muttered a shy thank you in halting English. The soldier smiled and moved on. Captain Nathan Cole approached him a moment later, map case under one arm, flashlight shielded in his palm. "You did good today," Cole said quietly. Lucas stared at the ground. Praise left him uneasy. "I just showed the way." "No," Cole said, voice firm. "You kept 38 men alive." The number startled Lucas. He hadn't realized the column was so large. The weight of what he had done pushed down on him again. Heavily, painfully. Cole crouched beside him. "Where's your unit? Your parents? Anyone?" Lucas swallowed hard, snow crunching beneath his boots. "My unit scattered. My home." His voice cracked. "My home was shelled 2 days ago. I don't know if my mother or sister got out." Cole didn't say anything at first. He just let the silence sit, heavy but not unkind. Then he rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder. The gesture was simple, but it loosened something in Lucas's chest he didn't realize had been locked for months. "You stay with us tonight," Cole said. "We move at dawn. Roads get worse from here. I might need your eyes again." Lucas nodded, though the decision tore at him. He should have run. But where? Into the barren forest? Toward the front line that was shifting by the hour? No, for tonight, he stayed. Hours later, the camp settled into a winter hush, broken only by the low hum of heaters and the occasional engine clank. Snow drifted endlessly, piling on tank hulls and helmets stacked beside the vehicles. Lucas tried to sleep inside the half-track the men let him use, curled beneath a blanket still warm from another soldier's body heat. But his mind tormented him with visions, the German patrol he had hidden from, the look on Captain Cole's face when he first held the map, the moment he raised his hands in front of the Sherman and stepped into the unknown. Traitor. Alive. Traitor. Alive. The words circled his thoughts like ice-cold wolves. Just past midnight, he could no longer stay still. He slipped out of the half-track and stepped into the clearing. Breath misting into the frozen dark. A faint glow flickered between the trees. A lantern, strange and moving. Lucas froze. Voices whispered. Not American. German. A patrol, maybe the same one, maybe another, had wandered dangerously close to the camp. Lucas ducked behind a boulder, heart pounding. If the soldiers spotted the tank silhouettes half buried in snow, the forest would erupt in gunfire. The Americans would wake to chaos. The tanks couldn't maneuver in time. Men would die. Lucas pressed himself lower, praying the Germans didn't hear the shuddering breaths he tried to swallow. Two shadows appeared through the swirling snow, silhouettes of German Gebirgsjäger troops with white winter smocks and Mauser rifles slung casually over their shoulders. They stopped just meters from the clearing's edge. "Tracks," one whispered in German. "Fresh, tank tracks." Lucas felt his blood turn to ice. The other soldier raised his lantern. "Armor heading north, maybe recon vehicles, should report it." They hadn't seen the actual tanks, not yet. They only saw the tracks leading into the clearing. If they walked 10 steps farther, they'd see everything. Lucas's pulse thudded painfully in his ears. Slowly, silently, he moved deeper into the forest, circling behind them. His boots crunched softly, barely noticeable under the wind's sigh. He held the blanket tight around himself, blending into the dark like a shadow the storm had forgotten. He needed to draw them away. He picked up a broken branch and threw it into the darkness to their right. The crack echoed sharply. Both soldiers snapped their heads toward the sound, rifles raised. "What was that?" one hissed. "I don't know. Move." They stalked toward the noise, boots crunching deep into snow. Lucas used the moment to slip farther behind them, careful to stay in their blind spot. His stomach clenched. If they spotted him now, they'd shoot without question. He picked up a chunk of ice and hurled it deeper into the forest. Another crack. The Germans reacted instantly, turning again and following. Lucas felt his legs tremble violently, but he repeated the movement, quietly, strategically, drawing them step by step away from the clearing. Finally, after several tense minutes, the Germans veered so far off the main path that their lantern glow dimmed and finally vanished into the trees. They were gone. Lucas waited until their voices were swallowed by the wind before he crept back toward the clearing. Captain Cole was already there, rifle raised, breathing heavily. "You heard them?" Lucas whispered. Cole nodded. "Barely. I saw your shadow moving out there. Kid, what the hell were you doing?" Lucas's breath shook. "Saving you again." The captain exhaled slowly, lowering his rifle. Something unreadable passed through his eyes, not just gratitude but a dawning understanding of who Lucas truly was. A boy who didn't belong to either side anymore. A boy who survived by choosing life over loyalty. Before dawn, the storm quieted. The tanks rumbled awake, exhaust steaming into the cold morning air. Lucas walked ahead once more, guiding the Americans along a narrow ridge path that curved away from German artillery zones. By midday, they reached a US-controlled roadway where infantry units were digging defensive positions. Captain Cole signaled the convoy to halt. "Kid," he said quietly, "this is where we part." Lucas felt a strange emptiness settle over him. He had expected relief, freedom, but instead he felt hollow, lost again. Cole stepped closer. "You saved my men, more than once. I can't take you farther, but I can make sure no American soldier hurts you." He handed Lucas a slip of paper, stamped, signed, sealed. Safe passage. "For any American checkpoint," Cole said, "they'll send you to a civilian camp. You'll get food, shelter, maybe find your family. War will end soon enough." Lucas stared at the paper, unable to speak. Cole put a hand on his shoulder. "You were never the enemy, son. Not tonight." Lucas nodded slowly, eyes burning with tears he refused to let fall. He stepped back as the engines roared to life. The column rolled forward, steel monsters shaking the earth. When the last Sherman passed, Lucas lifted a hand. The machine gunner atop the final tank saluted him with 2 fingers. A small gesture, but one Lucas would remember for years. Then the tanks disappeared into the white world beyond the ridge, leaving Lucas alone on the road, with the map case pressed to his chest. He turned toward the distant horizon where home once lay. He didn't know what he would find, but he walked anyway, because he had already survived a day most men never would, and because one lost map had shown him something unexpected. Sometimes the only side worth choosing is the one that leads you out of the darkness.